Hello folks, so today we'll be briefly taking a look at this Biticino lift emergency switch. So this is meant for a lift or an elevator in order to cut off the power in case of an emergency. So there's a piece of glass here that can be broken, and then there's a switch to actually shut off power to the lift. These are Well, this example is from the 60s, 70s, and you can find like identical ones still in place in several Italian apartment blocks to this day because they were simply very, very popular, and it's not strictly necessary to replace them, I suppose. But yeah, this example is quite a lucky find since it's new old stock. As you can see, it's in pretty decent condition, and none of the knockouts on the back of the actual wall box part have been removed, which means that yeah, it was never actually used necessarily. So it's a good example to actually take a look at and see kind of how it's built and how it works. So on the front there's this lid. As you can see, there's a key. The key is actually branded Biticino, so that's nice. And it can only be removed when the actual mechanism is locked. There we go. When it's open, the key stays here. Interesting design. So the lid can be removed, of course, for maintenance and installation. Here's the piece of glass that can be broken. I assume it's not safety glass because this is just so old. But yes, on the front there's a label that says emergency lift. In case of emergency, you can break the glass and lower the lever to actually shut off the lift. This Biticino logo, the old one. Occasionally you see Biticino devices with this old logo, and they just omit the B because the B in this kind of old logo was just kind of like a drawing, and then underneath there's Ticino. And I've also seen people think that this is like Swiss because like Ticino, right, the canton, but no, this is just the surname of the guy. But yeah, so as you can see, this is the lever. It's red for on, red danger, green off, safe. Kind of opposite of how you might mentally think of it, but there's kind of a logic to it, and I think it's qualified by law or whatever. So this is the switch itself, and naturally it's three-phase for the lift, and it would have gone inside the wall with only like this part actually being visible. But as you can see here, there are these three like round things, and these are fuses. So this isn't just a switch, it's also a fuse holder. And this was very, very common in Italy. For decades, we used fuse holders just as general isolator switches. Not entirely sure why, but it was just a thing. So this here is a double pole one, much smaller, as you can see. It's a surface mount device, so this would mount directly to the wall and stick out a fair bit. And as you can see, it also has like identical fuses. I think these are maybe slightly smaller because it's only 16 amps. Well, this is 26. Identical kind of switch coloring and just general design, even though this is plastic or this is metal. And yes, this would have been used as either for a house as protection, but also just, as I said, just as an isolation switch. These were extremely common, both in this cartridge fuse style, but also this type here. This again would have used a special wall box. These were also very common, and in this case it uses rewirable fuses that can be fitted. There are spare ones in this little cover, and you just remove the two screws, and you can change the fuse types. But the important thing is, often if these were only used as isolator switches, and I have actually witnessed this recently, they may not even have changed out the default fuse size from 25, which naturally rendered the actual fuses themselves useless, but that's fine because they weren't really using them as fuse holders, just as a switch, which is a bit strange, because Bitticino did also make just plain switches without any fuses, but for some reason those seemed less common. But for completeness, before these Bitticino devices, you had generally these rewirable ceramic fuse holders. Obviously, a lot more dangerous. You could touch the contacts quite easily, and naturally, as is typical, well, this is a different design, slightly later one. This is probably more from the 50s, I would imagine. As is typical, people could replace the wire with just about anything, in this case a random piece of copper. So at least the cartridge type fuses made that not impossible, but at least slightly harder, and of course generally safer to change out the fuse on these, especially with the switch. So overall, big improvement. But anyways, now the interesting part about these lift emergency switches is that the actual fuse holder itself is just a regular one that they just sold standalone, and then they simply added this like metal cover thing to then actually hold on the actual front safety cover with the glass and everything. But the actual item itself, electrically, like you could have bought this standalone, and you see this every once in a while on eBay or whatever, right? So that's kind of funny, but it makes sense just practically speaking. Nothing wrong with that. But anyways, let's take these two screws off and see just what's inside the contacts and everything. So having removed the front plate of the actual fuse holder itself, I would like to note first of all that the screws have a little hole in them, and this is common for all of the Bitticino fuse holders. This one also has it, and also the other one. The point of that was that you could have put a sealant wire on here, and you can see there's a little like hook, so little wire around here, and that way this couldn't have been turned unless the seal was broken. And that, I'm not entirely sure what the point of it might have been in this case specifically, but also I think it's just a standard design that they used on older products, so that's fair enough. But the important part is these were occasionally used by the electricity companies, so generally by this time Enel, the nationalized one. And so the sealant would have been to avoid people stealing electricity, since this would have been protection for the power meter. Although, that being said, I think generally they did put these after the meter, but it was to avoid people drawing more current that was allowed in their contract, I think. But anyways, yes, so that's what this hole is for. So looking inside, first of all, I have removed these two screws as well, which should allow this whole mechanism, there we go, to slide out. And then this, as I said, this is just a separate cover for the specific lift version. And then this is the plastic wall box, very, very thick plastic compared to modern day wall boxes. So this would have simply been fitted at the time of, I guess, when the building was constructed. You could dig a hole in the wall, put this in, then cover it up, and then later on do the wiring. It has, yeah, well, just the screw points that you screw it in. Not super interesting, except of course this is specific to this kind of item. it's not standardized, so you better hope you actually have the correct one, I guess. I think nowadays for some of these there are special adapter plates to fit a standard DIN rail item in these wall boxes, which is reasonable enough because otherwise it's a huge mess to replace these with kind of modern wall boxes for even just a DIN rail breaker box. But yeah, anyways, this is the actual fuse holder itself. So on the back there are these connections, obviously 3-phase in and out. There's also an earthing point, since this whole thing is metal. Whether or not this was realistically being used at the time is a little sketchy, but that just was the state of Italian electrics in the 60s and 70s, unfortunately. So yeah, the connection points are made up of these like nuts, I guess, that can be unscrewed. You could have, I'm guessing, probably just fit the wire around these washers and then screw it back in. Very similar setup to their breakers of the time, which I should show some other day. They're fascinating, just giant devices. These are the fuses. I should remove one. And actually, it seems like everything is falling apart now. So this is kind of similar to the Diezd and Neo-Z fuses used in other parts of Europe, except this is some not quite proprietary, but some like weird Italian specific standard, I think. But the general idea is the same. There's this cap that is unscrewed to remove the fuse. This is the fuse itself. It's a Bitticino branded 25 amp 380 volts, reasonable. At one end there's this little like dimple, I guess. It's actually colored. It's colored yellow since this is 25 amps. The other one that was 16 was gray. So this is the same color standard as dice fuses. And to install it, you simply have to place it like this. And then I think normally this was meant to have a bit of grip strength to actually hold this on its own, but this is old, so it doesn't do that anymore. So it would have fit it like this. And at least thanks to the switch, it would have been a bit safer, because otherwise, you remove this and just like this, you could have gotten shocked. So thank God for the switch. That was a critical part. Although that being said, they did technically sell some fuse holders without the switch, but I don't think they were very common. Anyways, so this is the fuse itself. On this kind of section itself, there's not really much to actually do, like installation wise, unlike with the breakers, where there would have been a knob to actually set the trip current, because that was a thing at the time. Breakers didn't have a fixed specified trip current, but of course this is a fuse, so you just put the right fuse in, hopefully. So the green and the red card is literally just a little card on the switch itself. This actually technically can be removed, I suppose. Actually, yeah, let's try to do that. So after having removed these screws, there's just this shell, I guess. There's an isolator plate to avoid having the live parts touch metal. There are things falling off. Great. So as you can see, the actual kind of electric part in and of itself is, in a way, very vintage looking. Right, like if you compare it to this very vintage fuse holder, I mean, they're both ceramic, but that was just the style of the time. In fact, ceramic as isolation for fuse holders continued being a thing for decades, and you can still occasionally find it nowadays. If you buy modern dies, they're Neo-Z fuse holders, which are still being sold, although naturally being phased out. More often than not, they will still have ceramic as the base, which is very strange to see, but I guess it's just a very good material. I should say ceramic or kind of similar materials. I know it's not really just ceramic, but you know. So yeah, these are the guts of the actual fuse holder itself. As you can see, this is the actual switch mechanism. Unfortunately, the actual switching action, I guess, can't actually be seen because there's this whole lever in place, and I'm not gonna risk removing it. But yes, that's where the switching happens. And then after that, there are the fuses. And then these are the outputs, so input and output, three-phase, as I said. And yeah, this kind of whole design, BTCino logo on the back on this ceramic piece. This whole design was kept like identical for ages. These old like fuse holders were sold from the 50s up to definitely the 70s and 80s. I don't know if they stopped selling them in the 90s. I'm gonna guess probably yes, but like several decades of basically identical designs because they were just that popular. And oddly enough, they kept doing that even just for breakers, which is weird because that's when breaker technology was advancing rapidly. But there aren't really that many differences between a breaker from BTCino from the 50s versus one from the 70s and 80s, which is weird, but that's something from another episode. And I hope you liked this video. If you did, I would recommend checking out my website, electricsarchive.eu, where I try to kind of collect and kind of show the history and general design differences of electrical installations from several countries. It's an ongoing effort, so it's not complete, but there's a lot of stuff there that I haven't shown on YouTube, so I would gladly recommend checking it out if you like this sort of electrical stuff. And yeah, I will see you in another video. Bye bye.